we're sitting with Eric, producer for Lucha Underground, executive producer, and talk to us about just what it all takes to kind of put Lucha Underground on television, from filming to screen.
Originally?
Originally. Let's start from the start.
The development of Lucha Underground was sort of a long process that developed fairly slowly. I was actually probably asked about it, say, about 4 years ago. My boss, Mark Burnett, he loves combat sports, just loves it. You know, I did The Contender for him. I did a show called Bully Beatdown for him. I was executive producing. I know you laugh, right? You remember that crazy show. You know, so I did some MMA stuff for him when he was involved with, it was like the King of the Cage Axis fights. I sort of produced some of that material for him. And so I kind of developed a little bit of expertise on shooting in and around a ring or a cage or anything where somebody gets punched in the face. That led me to being asked to do the Steve Austin season of Tough Enough. And then, not for Mark Burnett, that was for a different company, but they had my resume and they hired me to do that. And then, which led me then to Legends House for the WWE when they were getting that ready for the WWE Network. So I had now a couple of wrestling shows sort of on my resume. So Mark reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about doing a Mexican Lucha Libre show with Robert Rodriguez," and that's pretty much all I needed to hear. I said, "Okay, well, how do we do this?" He said, "Well, take a couple months and let's start working on the development." So I met with Dorian. I met with some of the other partners on the show. They talked about kind of, you know, the sort of filled me in on a lot of, you know, Lucha Libre, what it's all about, how it's done in Mexico, how they see it done here in the U.S., and some of the, you know, we talked financially about how we could do it. And so, you know, I started to go out and scouting locations. I saw the temple. I started making phone calls to people I knew in the wrestling business, and got Chris DeJoseph's resume, met with him, met with got Chris Roach's resume, called the guys I knew from Tough Enough, Martin Casals, Evil East, Matt Cross, a couple other guys that turned me down. We just started compiling a list of people who might be interested in doing it. Originally, I was asked to just develop it and say, do we want to do this show? And so after about 6 months of kind of like character development, the partners had brought in some people to do, you know, draw some costume sketches, to draw some character sketches, creating some characters. He said, "Well, do you want to do it?" And then I said, "Yeah, let's do it. This is going to be fun." And the rest is history. But it was a long, probably a year of development before we started to really, you know, put it on tape. Yeah.
And so, for people who want to get into wrestling, like, why is Lucha Underground the show? Like, why should they
I think it's pretty user friendly, you know, for lack of a better term. I mean, I wouldn't call myself a big wrestling fan. As a kid, I watched the old WWF. You know, I was at the WrestleMania 3 in LA, or no, 2 in LA when they had this steel cage match. I was in like 15 years old and I was in the crowd, so I liked it then, but fell away from it for years. I've always respected the big productions and people who can do big live television like WWE can do. But I wouldn't call myself a fan. I became a fan of Lucha Underground. I became a fan of Lucha Libre in this process. And I think why it's easy to get into is because we don't do traditional kayfabe. You know, we sort of rethink that. And we sort of think, well, if you're going to convince people to suspend their disbelief, go all the way with it. Go like a movie would do. Go like a comic book would do. You know, you know, I think that there is, as evidenced by the thousands of people who are downstairs, there is a big market for sci-fi, fantasy, and wrestling overlaps that group tremendously. And I think, you know, the worst thing that you can say to a wrestling fan is, well, you know, it's not real. You know, it's insulting to say that to a wrestling fan. Well, you would never say that to a fan of Game of Thrones. You wouldn't say, well, you know, Game of Thrones is not real. Of course it's not real. That's the point. The point is we're giving you something that you can suspend your disbelief and watch along like you would any sci-fi movie or any dramatic episodic television. So that's how we treat it.
Lucha Underground, it's definitely a unique way of storytelling with pro wrestling included. Would you say that is more artistic than other outlets?
I think we have that option because it's a post-production show. It's an edited show. Live television, you can't really do a lot of color correction. You can't do music editing. You can't do special effects. You can't do a lot of things that you do in the post-production process. My background is in editing. I was a reality TV editor for 15 years before I started running shows. And so I'm not a live TV guy. I'm a post-production guy. And so that's a cost savings thing too. You're going to have fewer people involved if you're taking it in the edit bay and you're doing the bulk of the work there. I think that it allows you to be more cinematic and allows you to be creative. I wouldn't say more creative, but creative in different ways using that process.
And like you said, there's a big market with sci-fi and just comic books now. So and Lucha Underground has a lot of those like comic book characters,
yes.
With Aerostar, and then we have oh my God, Drago.
Yeah.
So you bring in mysticism and sci-fi. And tell us about how you guys came up with the idea of the tribes and kind of coming up with this mythical war.
There was a manga that we sort of followed at the beginning. Robert Rodriguez created, and he had I think actually one of his sons was one of the artists on it, and he had other guys that he knew from the comic book world sort of created this manga, and we followed that initially. We said, okay, here's some of the characters, here's some of the mythology, let's kind of expand it and whatever. And he brought in one of his writers originally to sort of frame the universe, and then we just kind of took those sort of pillars and we just started to backload everything into it. We found a job for a homeless guy and then behind the announce table, and we just
legendary homeless guy.
So we it was always intended to be comic book level craziness. We get one of those.
All right.
It's crashing my show.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Sure. Awesome.
Thank you.